Most people think neglect has to be loud to be real. Yelling, abandonment, obvious cruelty. But emotional neglect is quiet, and that is exactly why it feels invisible. Psychology explains that the absence of something can wound just as deeply as the presence of something harmful. When emotional needs go unmet, there is no clear event to point to, no dramatic story, just a subtle, persistent emptiness. By the end of this, you will understand why emotional neglect is so hard to recognize, what it does to the brain over time, and how it shapes adult relationships, self-worth, and emotional awareness without announcing itself. Emotional neglect is not about what happened. It is about what did not happen. It's the comfort that was never offered, the curiosity about your inner world that never came, the emotional mirroring that never took place. And because nothing bad seems to have happened, it often goes unnoticed. In childhood, the brain develops through interaction. When a child expresses emotion and a caregiver responds with attunement, the child learns that feelings are valid and manageable. This builds emotional regulation pathways in the brain. When those responses are absent, development adapts differently. The child may stop expressing certain emotions because they do not lead to connection. Over time, this becomes automatic. Needs are minimized, feelings are suppressed. The nervous system learns that emotional expression doesn't change the environment. Silence becomes safety. Here's something important to reflect on. Did you grow up feeling materially supported but emotionally alone? That experience often confuses people. They feel ungrateful for sensing something missing. But emotional presence cannot be replaced with provision. The brain does not only need safety from harm, it needs engagement. When caregivers are physically present but emotionally distant, the attachment system becomes uncertain. The child may become self-reliant early, appearing mature and independent. Independence can sometimes be a survival strategy. As adults, emotional neglect often shows up as difficulty identifying feelings. You may sense discomfort but struggle to name it. You may default to logic instead of emotion. You may feel disconnected in moments that are supposed to feel intimate. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. The brain regions responsible for emotional awareness, such as the insula, develop through repeated emotional labeling and validation. When those experiences are limited, emotional literacy remains underdeveloped. You cannot express what you were never taught to recognize. In relationships, emotional neglect can feel like chronic loneliness even when you're not alone. A partner may be kind, responsible, and reliable, yet emotionally unavailable. Conversations stay on the surface. Vulnerability feels one-sided. And because there's no obvious abuse, it's difficult to explain the ache. Have you ever thought nothing is technically wrong, but something feels missing? That's often how emotional neglect presents. It's subtle dissatisfaction without a clear cause. Ambiguity makes it easy to dismiss. Here's a surprising insight. Emotional neglect can create a higher tolerance for emotional absence. If neglect feels familiar, you may gravitate towards partners or environments that replicate that dynamic. Familiarity can feel like compatibility. The nervous system often prefers what it knows, even if it's unfulfilling. In workplace settings, emotional neglect appears as leaders who focus only on performance metrics. Feedback may be efficient but emotionally flat. Achievements are acknowledged without genuine connection. Over time, employees may feel unseen. Being unseen erodes motivation quietly. The reason emotional neglect feels invisible is because it lacks contrast. When harm is obvious, the brain marks it clearly. But when care is simply missing, there's nothing dramatic to anchor memory. The wound is subtle. Subtle wounds are harder to validate. There's also social messaging involved. Many cultures prioritize toughness and self-sufficiency. Expressing unmet emotional needs may be labeled as weakness, so individuals internalize the belief that needing emotional attunement is excessive. They silence themselves again. Now, pause and ask yourself something honest. When you feel hurt, do you instinctively minimize it? Do you tell yourself it's not a big deal? That pattern often traces back to emotional environments where emotions were not acknowledged. Minimization becomes automatic. Emotionally neglected individuals often excel at supporting others. They become highly attuned to external needs while neglecting their own. Being needed feels safer than having needs. This creates imbalance in adult relationships. Another pattern is emotional numbness. When feelings are consistently dismissed or ignored, the nervous system may dampen emotional intensity as protection. This can lead to a sense of emptiness rather than distress. Emptiness is harder to identify than pain. It's also important to understand that caregivers don't have to be intentionally harmful for neglect to occur. Stress, distraction, or their own unresolved emotional limitations can reduce their capacity for attunement. Impact matters more than intent. Recognizing emotional neglect often begins with noticing what feels absent. Do your closest relationships allow emotional depth? Can you express fear, sadness, or joy without feeling uncomfortable or dismissed? If vulnerability feels foreign, that's meaningful. Here's a pattern interrupt. Imagine someone responding to your emotional disclosure with genuine curiosity and warmth. No fixing, no minimizing, just presence. Notice how your body reacts. For many people, that experience feels both comforting and unfamiliar. Healing emotional neglect involves learning emotional awareness deliberately, naming feelings, allowing them, sharing them in safe contexts. These practices gradually build neural pathways that were underdeveloped earlier. It is possible to learn what was not modeled. Self-compassion is especially important. When you begin recognizing unmet needs, grief may surface. Grief for the emotional presence you didn't receive. That grief is valid. It signals awareness, not weakness. Awareness is the beginning of change. The dark side of emotional neglect is invisibility, but the empowering side is clarity. Once you see the pattern, you can begin choosing differently. You can prioritize emotional depth. You can communicate needs more directly. You can redefine what connection means. Emotional neglect feels invisible because it's defined by absence, but absence leaves traces. It shapes identity, expectations, and attachment patterns. Recognizing those traces allows you to step out of automatic repetition. You are not broken, you adapted. The more you understand this, the more compassion you can offer yourself and others. Many people carry invisible emotional gaps without realizing their origin. Awareness reduces shame and increases choice, and choice changes trajectories. If this reflection resonated, consider what emotional presence looks like in your life right now. Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments if you feel comfortable. Conversations like this help bring visibility to what often remains hidden. And if you want to continue exploring the psychology of human behavior and relationships, consider subscribing to stay connected to deeper insights like these.